Hello and welcome back, and we begin with the next session on post-colonial literature in English. We have already done some texts of Caribbean literature, Caribbean post-colonial literature, which are White Sargasso by Jean Rhys and Omeros by Derek Walcott. We have already looked at Chinua Achebe's The Man of the People. So if you want to go over these texts, you can of course go to those lectures, but we are moving on to the second text that we are going to do of African literature, and that is a fascinating novel written by Tsitsi Dangarembga. The novel is called Nervous Conditions, right? So let's go on with the novel. Before we go on with the novel itself, the story itself, let's talk about the setting or the background of the story. The setting of the novel, it is set in Zimbabwe, also known as Rhodesia before it gained independence, right? In 1980 it became Zimbabwe. Prior to that it was known as Rhodesia. So Rhodesia was the successor state of British colony of Southern Rhodesia. So it was here, this is Zimbabwe. So Southern Rhodesia, the British colony, and Rhodesia was basically the successor state, right? It was a successor state. So in 1965, the whites, right, the whites in Rhodesia declared themselves independence and set up a government, right? Set up a government in Rhodesia, separated themselves from the metropole, that is Great Britain. So it became independent, and it was primarily a work of the white. It became officially recognized in 1980. In 1965, the white community, the white government was formed, which declared itself independent of Great Britain. So the British had been governing Rhodesia since 1923. The rapid decolonization of Africa in the late 1950s and early 1960s, they kind of alarmed the significant proportion of Southern Rhodesia's white population. So the rapid decolonization happening in other parts of the continent alarmed the white population in Rhodesia, and in an effort to delay the transition to black majority rule, in an effort to delay the black government or African government from coming into power, this was done, right? The Southern Rhodesian government issued its own unilateral declaration of independence from United Kingdom on 11th November 1965. So the white population formed a government and declared itself independent. The new nation identified itself simply as Rhodesia, and it initially sought recognition as an autonomous realm within the Commonwealth of Nations. But it reconstituted itself as a republic in 1970. So till 1970, between this time, it was largely an unrecognized state. It had declared independence on its own, and primarily the initial government that declared independence was from the white community. Now, as decolonization happens in other parts of the world, this predominantly white government is challenged by African nationalists, the African nationalist parties, or the parties that are coming from the black majority living in Rhodesia. So the two nationalist parties, Zimbabwe African People's Union and Zimbabwe African National Union, launched an armed insurgency against the government, sparking the Rhodesian Bush War. So the government declares, and the white community forms a government, declares itself independent. In 1970, it is recognized as Rhodesia, but the the African nationalist parties launch an offensive, launch a guerrilla war, launch an armed insurgency against the white government, which is trying to keep the African nationalists out of power, out of governance. So this is the time 1964 to 1979, Zimbabwe, this territory where Dangarembga sets her story, is actually a war state, a warring state, because there is a war, there is insurgency going on. We do not really see the war, right? We do not really see the war, but it is situated in this time of war between the white community and the white government and the African nationalists. We don't see, as I said, we don't see the war directly, but we see the war of ideologies and ideas as it happens right down to the grassroots in the households of the people. So the war is out there, we do not really see any action, but it is, you can see how the ideas of counter-colonialism, decolonization, these have all permeated to the grassroots. Of course, in 1979, Rhodesia is briefly reverts back to colonial status, pending new elections under British supervision. One of the African parties secures victory in the elections in 1980, and the country achieves international recognition as in April 1980 and is now known as Zimbabwe. So 1979, the elections really happen and African Nationalist Party gains victory and Zimbabwe comes into being. So coming to the author, Nervous Condition, it was published in 1988. It was first book to be published in English by an African woman from southern Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe, right? So first novel to be published in English by an African woman from southern Rhodesia. Dangarembga studied in Zimbabwe and she studied in England, and you would see, if you go over her biography, you would see certain, you can easily draw some parallels with the characters in her novel. So there are autobiographical elements in Nervous Conditions. For instance, her parents taught at a mission school, right? Dangarembga's parents taught at a mission school. Her mother was the first African woman from southern Rhodesia to obtain a bachelor's degree, and her father would later become a schoolmaster. She lived in England from the age of 2 to 6 while her parents pursued higher education. There she recalls in one of her interviews that she and her brother began to speak English and almost forget their language. They almost forgot their language, Shona, which they had learned, which they used when they were in Africa. In 1965, she moved with her family to a mission school where her father and mother took up positions, their positions as the headmaster and the teacher. In fact, she started studying medicine in Cambridge later on, but quit after 3 years as she experienced racism and isolation. So you can clearly see some parallels with the character of Nyasa, right? You can clearly see some parallels between her story, her autobiography, her story, and Nyasa's experiences. Now, Nervous Conditions was published, as I said, in 1988. The sequels come out in in 2006, right? Almost 2 decades later, and then another one almost a decade later. So the Book of Naught and This Mournable Body, which was published in 2018. Dangarembga is also an activist, a prominent activist. She was arrested on 31st July 2020. It made to the headlines. She was arrested as a head of anti-corruption protests. And later that year, she was on the list of BBC's 100 most influential women, as it was announced on 23rd November 2020. And these are some of the awards that she has won for her work, not just as a writer, but also a writer with a purpose. Okay, so the novel Nervous Conditions is essentially belongs to this genre, or comes from this, fits into this genre of Bildungsroman. What is a Bildungsroman? You all know, I think you would all know it is a novel of growth, it's a novel of coming of age, and Nervous Conditions fits into that pattern of the novel, right? The generic pattern of the novel of Bildungsroman. So it is, as I said, it is a story of a single individual's growth and development within the context of a defined social order. The growth process at its root, it is essentially a quest story, a hero monomyth, right? Exemplified by the hero monomyth. A young hero sets out on a journey where he gains friends, he encounters obstacles, he acquires powers to overcome those obstacles, fight evil, and in the end, after being victorious, he comes back and is reintegrated into the society. So that is essentially the quest story, and Bildungsroman has its Bildungsroman has its roots in the quest story. It has been described as an apprenticeship to life, or search of a meaningful existence within a society, right? And it is very important, this with being within a society, and adolescent acquires maturity, grows up, becomes an adult, and takes his position or her position in the society, right? So that reintegration, all the hero monomyths end with this return of the hero. So that reintegration is important. M. Bakhtin, who's written essays on Bildungsroman, Chronotope, and so on, he describes Bildungsroman as the image of man in the process of becoming in the novel, right? So image of man in the process of becoming. So becoming what? Becoming a member of the society, becoming adult, man comes into being, right? So how from an adolescent, a young adult, from a young adult, an adult comes into being. And excuse me for saying, using this gender signifier, but that's how Bakhtin talks of it. So as I said, the story of individual growth and development within the context of a defined social order. Eventually, the spirit and values of the social order become manifest in the protagonist, who becomes a part of the society. The novel ends with an assessment by the protagonist of himself or herself and their place in the society. So this is essentially a Bildungsroman. So long and arduous and gradual coming of age, which consists of repeated clashes between the protagonist, his or her needs and desires and views and judgments enforced by the unbending social order. So through these clashes, there is the end is kind of a reconciliation, as the protagonist becomes a part of that social order. So Bildungsroman has been a very popular genre, especially among the British writers. The reason behind the fact that Thackeray, Dickens, Bronte, George Eliot, they all use this pattern to explore the formation of characters, coming of being of the characters, and this is, that's why Bildungsroman has been a very important genre in English studies, in English literature, because it enables to explore the development of an individual and also the social order, right? And it kind of integrates so man's relation or a woman's relation to his or her social order. So that has been a kind of a very common form of a common genre used by the English writers. It is also a very common genre of adolescent or young adult literature, where it is about the growth of a young boy or a girl into adulthood. Now there's certain if we talk about Bildungsroman as a generic pattern, we just saw this. It is kind of a quest. The important thing is about the reintegration of the protagonist, his return to the society. So the two directions: an individual as being a self or a subject is subjected, ordered, dominated, determined, constructed by his or her social order. So in a way, the social order dominates and shapes the individual subject or the self. The other view of Bildungsroman is a liberal humanist view of the individual as being self or subject that displays autonomy and self-sufficiency, that is, a free subject that creates himself or herself on the basis of his or her personal experiences with relation to the society. So we can have either Bildungsroman, we can read it as a genre which shows the power of the society and the individual, his growth, his adulthood, or her growth and her adulthood, they are all shaped by the social order, right. It is a genre which talks about the social order. On the other hand, the liberal humanist point of view is that it actually it's a kind of a it shows the clashes and how the reconciliation between the social order and the individual growth, how it achieves the individual growth is actually a reconciliation of an individual and the social. So these are the two debates that underwrite the genre of Bildungsroman. So now coming to this post-colonial Bildungsroman, how does a self, or how does a subject, or how does an individual being grow up and fit into a post-colonial society, a society that is dominated by colonial experiences? So how does a child, how does an adolescent, how does a young adult grow up and fit into a colonized world of Rhodesia, right? How would Tambu, how would Nyasa grow up and fit into this world of Rhodesia, which is oppressive in terms of race, in terms of class, in terms of gender. So where is the place for Nyasa and Tambu to fit in? How do they become a part of this social order? How do they, the templates available to them, if they want to be a part of the African community, the templates available to them are their mothers. But we can see how unfair, how oppressive the traditional society is to the women. But if we talk about education, we talk about emancipation through education, we see that education, the colonial education that is available to them, which might help to emancipate, which might help to empower them, is actually putting them in a kind of a lower place as a colonial subject. They would always be the African, never really gain, they would never really fit in or grow up to fit in a colonized society. They would always occupy a subservient position. So how does one grow up and fit and become a part of the society that is oppressive and that is unfair to the self? How does the Bildungsroman of a post-colonial subject, where does it lead, how does it end? So the two novels of the genre that we are going to do Nervous Conditions. We have already read and discussed White Sargasso Sea, where the only, what is a resolution? Where does Antoinette fit in? Where does she find a place for herself? She does not, right? She does not fit in. She goes mad, or she is declared mad. So I think there's this madness in both this Nervous Condition, some kind of a kind of an imbalance, psychological imbalance that is created by the colonial condition. So I think that finds an echo from White Sargasso Sea to nervous condition. So, the condition of colonialism denying a proper resolution that is available to the protagonist of an English Bildungsroman. We've already discussed that in White Sargasso Sea, that the trajectory of growth available to Antoinette, or trajectory of growth available to Jane Eyre, is not available to Antoinette. Right? So, what is the trajectory? Is growth possible? Is coming of age possible for a post-colonial subject? Now, the title of the book, Nervous Conditions, comes from the statement that it is a statement, or it's a line used by Sartre in the introduction to Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. So, it is the line is, the condition of native is a nervous condition, and that's why I said look at the parallel, this psychological imbalance. The madness in White Sargasso Sea echoed in the nervous conditions. The condition of a native is a nervous condition. Right? So, colonialism is not just physically or economically oppressive, it is also psychologically oppressive. So, Dangarembga is exploring the psychological as well as social and economic effects of colonization. So, this illness, right, in mental illness is a persistent theme in the novels, in the post-colonial Bildungsroman. For Nyasha and for Tambo, the condition of the native as a nervous condition comprises not only colonization, but also the condition of gender and the condition of female education. Their attempts to come of age, their attempts to grow up, function in a society that does not allow them socially acceptable verbal written outlets as education. The templates of growth available to them are traditional roles like their mothers, right, or they are, as we see often, there is punishment, there are expressions of anger, dissatisfaction. So, the effect of colonization permeates the text, but it is also colonization in the sense of colonization, political colonization, but also gendered and sexual colonization of women, resulting in the social construction, resulting in this construction of gender roles and the male privilege in African society. So, Tambo's coming of age story takes place within this context and charts the resistance of various female characters within the extended resistance as well as conformity, right. So, they conform, they resist. So, this constant clashes, this constant conflict, there is no resolution, as I said, they never really find a place to fit. The anger and resentment persists. So, as these female characters deal with multiple forms of oppression in terms of sexism, racism, colonialism and capitalism. So, a brief coming to the book, a brief look at the society, right, a brief look at the society that is depicted in the novel. So, it is a Seguake family, right, the family, and they are a Shona is an ethnic group. They follow, so they are a Shona, they belong to the Shona ethnic group, and it is a patrilineal society, that is, the descent is traced from father to son. So, it is descent from descent through males. So, patrilineal kinship system, and they also practice patrilocality. What is patrilocal? It just means that after marriage, the bride leaves her home to live with his or her husband, to live with or be near her husband's family. So, under patrilineal system, the line of descent or authority is traced, as I said, through fathers. So, men, brothers, their children, sons, as you see various instances in the novel, that is the patriarchy. At one point of time, Tambo talks about the patriarchy. So, patriarchy basically it is a group of people who are connected through this patrilineal line of descent. Patrilineal line of descent. So the fathers and the family's male heads of the family, especially, they are respected, they are obeyed. Because they are the immediate representative of the clan. They are the immediate representatives of the family. And this is not only seen in the mindsets, we see it in the rituals, in the customs, in the gestures. For instance, if you remember Tambu, when the family from Baba Mukru and the family comes from England, Tambu carries water for everyone to wash their hands, and the sequence of the people then who wash their hand depends on their patrilineal order, from the oldest brother to the younger brother, then to the sons-in-law, then sisters, sons. So the daughters, in that case, in such a scenario, the daughters, especially the unmarried daughters and the women who are married into the family, occupy the lowest position in that order. Now, another feature that we see being discussed is the tradition of Rura, or the bride price. A wife at the time of her marriage exchanges the authority of her father for that of the husband, right? Wife, before marriage, she lives under the authority of her father, and then she moves with her husband. So she lives under his authority. Now, this is true as we see in here, but we have also seen it in other novels like White Sagasusi, right? So the women depend on the father and then on the husband. So patrilineal Shona marriages and the children that result are traditionally legitimized by the exchange of Rura, or the bride price, or bride wealth, it is also referred to, in which the bride's family accepts livestock and other movable property, and more recently cash or opportunities of earning cash in compensation for the loss of the daughter. So when a woman gets married, the bride's family gets this kind of property, like livestock or cash, and so on. So this is called the price of the bride price, or bride wealth. Now, why is a daughter, we already talked about, since they occupy such a low position in the patrilineal order, so why is it important? Why do they command a bride price? That is because of her labor, the work that she would do in the family, in the household, and also in the fields, and also her capacity to bear children, or her fertility. So that's what is valuable. An arura or the bride price is rarely paid in full or all at once. Very often, the bride's group often maintains a leverage over their in-laws by keeping the groom and his kin in their debt. So we see that happening here, right? So we see this in the novel. For instance, Tiksha is paying off the Rura, or the bride price for his second wife, right? He's already paying, and so he needs money. So bride wealth transactions have traditionally been understood not as calculated buying or selling of wives, but they were traditionally more they were seen as symbolic tokens for a woman's value. But it is a problematic aspect in the novel, as we shall see later. Now, just to talk about the family of Sigwake family, we know Baba Mukru. He is the oldest son. He is the one who is educated in English, the one who goes to England with his family. He is married to Maigaru, and they go to England and come back in 5 years, and they have 2 children. Jeremiah, Tambu's father, married to Manini. Now, Manini is not really, might not be really her name. It is a reference to, it means young wife, right? Maigaru means older wife, right? So it could be, it is interesting to see that these women don't really have any names, but the older woman in the older woman married into the family, and the wife of the younger brother. So that is how they really don't have any individual names. They are just identified and defined by their position. And then you have we have another brother, that is Thomas and Tete Gladys, right? That she is a sister. And if you remember later on in that book, these are the people who comprise of the patriarchy. This is the group that Tambu refers to as patriarchy. So that is the background, and now we would go on with the novel itself. We start with the novel in the next session, in the next video.